but they never have had any of the freedoms we've had because of the vision of our forebears. And now, these two ideologies of liberty versus tyranny, the culture of 1984, the boot stomping on the human face forever, is colliding with the spirit of 1776.
It's our turn in the barrel. It's our turn.
Everybody is at that crossroads, Stuart. I mean, we're here now, and it's time to choose a side. I hope everybody out there watching researches this information and realizes you're part of history. Don't just sit there on the bench. Now is the time. I mean, I'll quote Braveheart, from the movie Braveheart. Don't sit there many years from now lying in your beds wishing that you could, come back here and tell our enemies they can take our lives, they'll never take our freedom. But the secret is most of you don't have to give up your lives. People give up their lives to get some oil for the bankers, or to go overthrow some dictator 5,000, 6,000 miles away. Why not just stand up and be in the spotlight and go to your city council, go to your legislature, go speak to your police chief, and continue to mainline the idea of liberty? Because we've got the winning ideas. We've got history on our side. We're the good guys. And as long as we stand up and are bold and don't hide our light under a bushel, we can't be beaten. The tyrants are trying to intimidate us right now because they're scared, Stuart.
That's right. And they're trying to make us fear for our own safety. But the answer to fear is love. And the strongest power we have is love for our children and our grandchildren. And as Thomas Paine said, if there is going to be trouble, let it come in my day, so my child will have peace and freedom. So that's our answer, is stand up, do it for your kids. A woman whose children are being attacked by a bear, she has no fear. She'll throw her life away for her children. That's the spirit we got to have. That you're defending, because what's what you're really doing? You're defending your children and your children's children. So if you stand on that kind of posture, fear won't bother you at all. That's what courage is.
Absolutely. We're joined now by Michael Boldin, and he heads up the 10thamendmentcenter.com. And Stuart's traveling around the country with Mr. Boldin and a lot of other great lovers of liberty as part of the Nullify Now tour. And Michael Boldin, good to have you here in studio with us.
Glad to be here, Alex.
We've only got about 10 minutes. We could probably talk for 10 hours, so I want to try to give you the floor and then any final comments by Stuart concerning nullification and how it is one of the main keys to restoring our republic. Because the federal government has obviously been usurped by foreign corporate globalist interest. Then we're going to bring in Brandon Smith, who's also part of your great tour, to break down something we can do at the grassroots level to also diminish the power of the private Federal Reserve and the banking cartel. So you've got the floor. Tell us about nullification. It's getting demonized. I mean, they're saying that this is more evil than kryptonite. That this stuff basically is Satan itself. But when I read the Bill of Rights, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, that's all I hear about. So I guess they're saying our American system is what's so devilish.
Well, you know what? The peace president bombs countries around the world. The drug war rages on. The Patriot Act exists. Bailouts, mandates, regulations, they never seem to end. The Fed prints and prints and prints and prints. And we have an essential question that we need to answer, and Thomas Jefferson answered this question back in 1798 as well. When government does not follow the rules given to it, and for us that's the Constitution, so there's certain rules, certain things that the federal government is authorized to do, what do you do about it? Do you march on Washington, D.C. on a date like September 12th? And do you beg federal politicians to limit their own power? Do you go to federal courts and do you ask federal judges, limit the federal government's power? Do you vote the bums out in the hopes that the new bums are going to say, all this power that you've given us, we don't want it, have it back? Well, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison both warned us that if the federal government ever became the sole and exclusive arbiter of the extent of its own powers, that power would always grow, whether we had elections or protests or separations of power or any other vaunted part of the American system. So in 1798, in response to what was known as the Alien and Sedition Acts, Thomas Jefferson wrote, and James Madison as well, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. And they said, or Jefferson wrote, he said, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy whenever, now every single time, the federal government violates the Constitution. He didn't say it was just a good idea to stand up and say no in our states, after we voted some bums out or went to court or protested. He said we were supposed to do it as it happened. So Nullification, which is the idea of doing anything with our states on a state legislature or even jury nullification to render a particular federal law null and void or unenforceable in a state, that's our duty. We're supposed to do that as it happens. We're not supposed to wait 2 or 4 years for an election for new bums to come in. We're not supposed to wait 6 years for a case to get to the Supreme Court so some federal judges can give us permission to exercise our rights. We're supposed to stand up for our rights and exercise them in our states and in our communities, whether they, the government, want us to or not. And it's awesome to have someone like Stuart on board as a sponsor and as an anchor, a major speaker at our Nullify Now tour, putting this into the mainstream discussion. I mean, you talked about how this is really irritating the mainstream. I mean, just this week, Rachel Maddow over at MSNBC did a 15-minute special about how people who support the 10th Amendment Center, people who are standing up for nullification, they're evil, like you said. We must be interested in owning black people because somehow, some way, if you want to decentralize, you don't want the central control over every aspect of your life.
But it was states' rights that first really got abolition going and gave it its power.
Yes, well, I'm glad you brought that up. The reality is, well, you know, in our government-run schools, everything's been twisted around. They tell us that...
Don't want government-run health care, don't like black people.
Well, absolutely, you know, that's...
You're like, what does that have to do with that?
Well, they tell us that the Civil War was about nullification. Well, the reality is, let's say everything that they say, everything else is right, and that the South only wanted slaves and nothing else. Well, what would they have to nullify? The Constitution at the time allowed slavery. They weren't nullifying. In fact, South Carolina's Declaration of Causes for Secession, it's available online, really easy to find, their official document to say why they seceded. They give a long explanation about the structure of government, and then the #1 complaint they had was those darn northern states were trying to nullify the Fugitive Slave Act, which was requiring or trying to require northern states to send black people back to the South into slavery.
And by the way, anybody who takes even high school history knows that. They know full well. It's just a good throwaway line. But regardless, this is 150-something years ago. What people need to understand is the federal government itself is openly a cash machine for the Fortune 100 that have come in. We have a private central bank that issues our currency and credit. They have used us to fund their operations, to be their military force. We owe over $1,000 trillion that we've supposedly signed on to through derivatives. That's the issue. The federal government with unfunded mandates is destroying the states, and the federal government has got involved in everything, in what kids eat in school, in what the road signs look like, in speed limits. They don't have this business. And if somebody reads the Constitution, Bill of Rights, it's all right there. And the fact that if you go back to 1913, the same year they gave us the private Federal Reserve and its taxing system of the income tax, they also got an amendment passed to take U.S. senators, I think this is key, away from the states. Previously, the legislature, elected by the people, would then vote and would have a U.S. senator that was their creature. And if they didn't do what the state said, they were removed back to the state because there was a separation of power. That's how much power the states had, in that they controlled the U.S. Senate. And you're not getting anything through Congress if you don't control the Senate. But since then, they've made them creatures of the Federal Reserve. And that's why they did that. And so I would answer Maddow back, well, why then did we ever have senators at the state level sent by the states? We understand what's happening. They've taken the power from the states to the federal government, now from the federal government to the globalist, and that's what's happening. And so thank God for nullification. We need to have the states stand up for their rightful liberties of the people and cut the head off of the snake.
Pulling the rug out from under them. That's
Absolutely.
The reality. And you know, James Madison was a pretty smart dude. You know, and in Federalist number 45, he said the powers given to the federal government are few and defined, and those left with the states are numerous and indefinite. And those few and defined primarily Article 1, Section 8. And if you look at Clause 3, the Commerce Clause is the one that they twist
And if people
over
don't
and
like
over
it, they don't like America.
Well, you know, you hate America if you want the freedom to choose the size of your toilet, or what plant you can grow in your backyard and consume, or if you don't want to go overseas and kill millions of brown people for the elites in Washington, D.C. You hate America and you hate freedom. Well, the reality is it's really the other way around, and I think more and more people on the grassroots are getting sick and tired of it, and that's why this idea, they don't want us to talk about nullification. We're doing it anyway.
Well, tell us shortly short and sweet for new listeners or viewers, what is nullification and what's its progress right now?
Nullification is the idea that when the federal government passes a law, which is really no law at all, it's a usurpation of power. When they pass a law that's a violation of the Constitution, it's your duty in your state to do something, whether to pass a particular piece of legislation, to reject, to say it's null and void, it's of no effect, to prevent its enforcement in your state. And it has a lot of progress right now. People are really waking up to this idea. There are 15 states that are defying Congress and the Supreme Court on medical marijuana. They say that we can't have a plant in our backyard and grow it and consume it. Well, we're doing it anyways. There's 25 states that have rejected the Bush-era Real ID Act. And, you know, they keep having to, push it off and push it off and push it off.
Hundreds of cities are rejecting the Patriot Act.
Absolutely, that's the same concept. We can even go down to a local level. There's been 8 states that have passed a Firearms Freedom Act that say that if you make a gun in your state and you sell it in your state, federal government, get the hell out of here. You can't do that. Absolutely, just passed, like Stuart said, just passed in Utah, a sound money bill. The 10th Amendment Center also authors legislation. We have a Federal Health Care Nullification Act to reject not just Obamacare mandates, but the entire idea that the federal government should be involved in health care at all.
And by the way, I want to ask both of you this. And viewers out there, how discredited is Obamacare? Written by the insurance companies to force 35 million people to buy an overpriced product, allows the insurance companies to start telling doctors what they can and can't do to reduce their cost. And now thousands of major companies like McDonald's are given waivers to not have to buy it. Stuart, I don't have to be a lawyer to know this, but you're a constitutional lawyer. Is that not true discrimination? We always think of discrimination, black, white, or things like that. What about economic discrimination? That if you're a government insider or you give money to the Democratic Party, or when the Republicans are in power to their party, you get a waiver. You don't have to buy this insurance, but the hamburger place next to McDonald's that's owned by, the Rhodes or the Johnsons or the Sanchez's, they've got to go and buy the insurance. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, it is, but unfortunately the courts have not found things like that to be unconstitutional, as corrupt as they may be. But at least one federal judge did realize that compelling you to go buy insurance is unprecedented. They're not just saying you can't do something like law usually does. It's saying you must go do something. So even a federal judge, as indoctrinated as they are to believe in expanded power of the state, couldn't swallow that.
Well, that's like the Soviets. They would say, every week on these hours, you've got to come help dig ditches on top of all your other jobs.
Yeah.
And just like we see now in Chicago, parents can't pack their kids' lunches, and they say you can't be trusted. So, I mean, we are literally becoming complete vassals.
Right. Nothing that we don't let you do, you're allowed to do, and all the things that we say that you should do, you must do. So they're flipping on its head the idea of freedom.
But I think they're rushing so hard in this power grab that it's doing the opposite. It's accelerating an awakening. So then the control freaks, the statists push even harder for more control, and then that only accelerates our awakening. And then they get even more panicked and more brazen and more naked. Finish up with where this movement's going. You were already breaking it down. Very exciting.
It's endless. It's not left versus right. It's us versus them, as you know. And of course, they want to keep us in this box. And while we keep fighting against each other, they keep taking more money and more power for their friends, for the General Electric types, for the war profiteers. But the reality is we're trying to reject the TSA. We're trying to reject the Patriot Act. We're working on nullifying national health care. We're working on nullifying the use of our states' guard troops overseas to occupy foreign countries. And there's bills introduced all over the country to do this. Some of them are already passing, as we've seen success in issues like marijuana and the Real ID Act, and we can
And it's a process. The states are now rediscovering their power.
They're learning about it. You know, what's happened over the last few years, more and more state reps are contacting us saying, well, what do we do about, I don't know, constitutional tender, or we want to grow hemp in Kentucky. Well, write a bill, or we'll provide you. We have tons of them at 10thamendmentcenter.com for all kinds of different issues. We'll provide you a bill to introduce in your state, pass it, say, we're not going to allow federal agents to stop our farmers from growing hemp. And if they try to, we're going to arrest them and put them in jail. And that's what we're seeing all across the country.
And we see Texas saying,
the TSA.
Well, not just TSA, that they'll start arresting these TSA agents when they molest people, but Texas is saying, we're going to keep our coal-powered power plants.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because Obama couldn't even get Congress, much less Commerce Clause. he couldn't even get Congress to pass a law to do it, so he ordered his executive branch minions, the bureaucrats, to do it, and Texas is fighting that. I mean, I see it every day in the news. The fight is on. It's exciting, and the bushfires in the minds of men are being lit by people like both of you gentlemen. Any closing comments on this subject?
Alex, we need your help. You have been out in the forefront reporting on this state sovereignty and nullification movement, and we need you to keep pushing it, because every time you talk about it, every time you interview someone like Charles Key or Randy Brogdon or Sam Rohrer or Matt Shea or Susan Lin or all the number of great state reps that you've had on over the last few years, we get so much contact over at 10thamendmentcenter.com. We want to know what we can do to support these states.